There's been talk of Harry Kane, hasn't there? But who knows who they're going to go for.
Do you think Harry Kane will be ready for United?
I don't know. I like him. I like what I've seen. I've been mightily impressed. We will only really know when he has a bit of a bad spell and whether he can cope. And season 2 tends to answer a lot of questions.
Two England captains, two legends of the same shirt, one very public falling out right in the middle of the biggest tournament England had played in years. Gary Lineker said what he saw. Harry Kane said Lineker had crossed a line. Fans picked sides almost immediately, and the argument tore through every pub, every phone-in show, every comment section in the country. But here's the thing, while everyone was arguing about who was right and who was wrong, the football was quietly making the verdict for them. And by the time Euro 2024 was over, only one of them had been proven correct. I am Oliver, and this is Sport Icons. England arrived at Euro 2024, carrying the weight of decades. You know the feeling by now, the belief every 2 years that this time, finally, this group of players will end it. And on paper, there were real reasons for optimism. Harry Kane had just finished a record-breaking season at Bayern Munich, becoming the first player in club history to score 36 Bundesliga goals in a single campaign. Jude Bellingham had been the best player in the world at Real Madrid. Foden had won everything at Manchester City. The squad looked on paper like the best England had assembled in a generation. Kane arrived as captain, as record scorer, as the man the entire attacking system was built around. The plan was straightforward: get the ball to Kane, let him hold it up, bring others into play. And when the moment came, trust him to finish. It had worked for years. There was no reason to believe Germany would be any different. Then Gary Lineker started watching the group stage games, and he said what he saw. The criticism wasn't delivered with aggression. Lineker didn't call Kane out of form or suggest he was past it. What he said was more specific than that, and in some ways more uncomfortable. He pointed out that Kane was dropping too deep, constantly pulling away from the striker position, collect the ball in midfield areas. In football terms, dropping deep means a centre-forward leaves the penalty box and comes back toward his own half to get on the ball. For a player whose entire value is built around being the last man, the finisher, focal point inside the box, that habit creates a problem. When Kane drifted back, there was nobody in the space he left behind. England's attack had no fixed point. Nobody was making those runs in behind. The whole shape lost its threat. Lineker made this argument clearly and repeatedly. It wasn't a passing comment. He kept returning to it because match after match, Kane kept doing it. The reaction from fans was immediate discomfort. The feeling from many was that a former England captain was publicly criticising the current one during a live major tournament, and that felt disloyal. Some in the media framed it as punching down. Others suggested Lineker was being unnecessarily harsh on a player who had given everything for his country. But Lineker wasn't finished, because beyond the tactical concern, he had noticed something else entirely, and that second observation cut far deeper than the first. The tactical argument was one thing. A player dropping too deep is a problem you can fix at half-time, or at least address in training. What Lineker raised next wasn't something Gareth Southgate could solve with a whiteboard session. He questioned whether Kane was physically capable of performing at the level England needed him to, not because of injury, but because of accumulated exhaustion from a season that had never really stopped. Think about what Kane had done before boarding the plane to Germany. A full Bundesliga campaign, 36 league goals, European nights with Bayern, the demands of leading the line for one of the biggest clubs on the planet week after week, from August straight through to the end of May. Most players arrive at a major tournament carrying some fatigue. Kane arrived carrying a full season's worth of everything, with barely enough time between the final league game and England's first group match to catch his breath. Lineker watched the group stage and said plainly that Kane didn't look right. Not injured, not disinterested, just heavy. There was a flatness to his movement, a slight delay in his reactions that wasn't there in previous tournaments. The burst of pace that used to get him into dangerous positions wasn't firing. When chances came, Kane was half a second slow. That half second, international level, is the difference between a goal and a ball straight at the goalkeeper. England's group stage performances made it difficult to argue otherwise. They laboured through matches they were expected to win comfortably. The attack looked disconnected, with Bellingham and Foden operating in the same zones as Kane rather than feeding off him as the fixed reference point. There was no rhythm to England's play in the final third. and the absence of a striker who could hold his position and draw defenders created space for nobody. Lineker didn't dress it up. He said openly that the relentless schedule of modern top-level football was catching up to Kane, and that international football might eventually become the thing Kane decides he can no longer sustain alongside his club commitments. That suggestion that Kane might one day walk away from England to protect himself landed like a stone in a quiet room. It wasn't a threat or a prediction. It was an honest reading of where Kane's body appeared to be. Some fans found that genuinely difficult to hear. There's a particular kind of discomfort that comes with someone describing a problem you've already sensed but haven't wanted to name. Plenty of people watching England's group games privately felt something was off with Kane. Lineker just said it out loud, and that made him the target rather than the observation itself. Reactions split sharply from there. Some agreed quietly, others defended Kane loudly, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Kane himself had been watching and reading. And he'd had enough. Kane's response came publicly, and it was measured enough to sound reasonable while carrying a real edge underneath. He didn't dismiss Lineker by name at first. Instead, he broadened it out, directing his words at former England players and pundits as a group, which everyone understood to mean Lineker specifically. The argument Kane made was this: tournament football is harder than it looks from a TV studio, and the people describing his performances from the outside had forgotten what it actually feels like to be inside it. That's not a weak point. Kane had lived inside 4 major tournaments by that stage. He knew the physical and mental grind of playing knockout football under national expectation, the way every training session carries extra weight, the way a missed chance at a club game and a missed chance at a major tournament are 2 completely different psychological experiences. The pressure of wearing that armband, of being the man the country looks to, doesn't ease up between matches. It compounds. But Kane went further than that. He said something that landed particularly hard on people who were paying close attention. He acknowledged that pundits have a right to their opinions, that honesty is part of the job. He said former England players carry a responsibility that goes beyond ordinary analysis. People listen to them. Players in that dressing room listen to them. Young players especially, ones still building their identity in international football, absorb what they hear from men who've done it before. When a man who wore the same shirt, who captained the same team, stands on TV and publicly questions whether England's current captain is physically broken and tactically damaging, it doesn't just stay in living rooms. It travels, it affects morale. It shapes the atmosphere around a squad that's still in a tournament, still fighting. That argument cut through. A large section of fans who had felt uncomfortable with the pile-on during the group stage found Kane's framing persuasive. There's a difference, they felt, between criticism and publicly undermining. Lineker, in their view, had crossed from one into the other. Lineker didn't see it that way, and he didn't pretend otherwise. His reply was calm but completely firm. He refused to apologise. He said England's performances had genuinely not been good enough, and that describing what was happening on the pitch wasn't disloyalty, it was the job. Pretending things were fine when they clearly weren't would have been the dishonest choice, and dishonesty dressed up as loyalty doesn't actually serve anyone. Some journalists then accused Lineker of stirring the pot, of chasing attention during a major tournament by targeting England's captain. Lineker pushed back on that too, pointing out that the media's framing of his criticism as provocative said more about their discomfort with directness than anything he had actually said. He hadn't called for Kane to be dropped. He hadn't questioned Kane's character or commitment. He had described a tactical and physical problem that was visible in the footage. What the exchange between the 2 men really exposed was the tension that runs through every major tournament England enters, the gap between what fans want to believe and what the evidence keeps showing. Loyalty is a comfort. Honesty is a cost. And what happened next on the pitch made that cost impossible to keep ignoring. Strip away the argument between 2 men and look purely at what the football showed, and the picture becomes uncomfortable very quickly. Kane's habit of pulling into deeper positions didn't just leave the striker zone empty. It created a congestion problem in the middle of the pitch that nobody on England's coaching staff seemed able to fix. Bellingham operates best in the half spaces, arriving late into the box, making runs that defences can't track because he starts from deeper ground. That late run only works when there's a fixed striker holding the defensive line, drawing the centre-backs deep and pinning them in place. Without that anchor, defenders can drop off and meet Bellingham on his terms rather than scrambling to cover two threats at once. Foden needs room to receive, turn, and drive. When Kane drifted back into those same zones to get on the ball, all three players ended up occupying the same narrow band of the pitch at once. Defenders didn't need to split their attention. They could manage all three with the same defensive shape because all three were arriving from the same direction. England's attacks became readable. Opposition teams sat in, let Kane collect the ball 30 yards from goal and accepted that he wouldn't turn and run at them from there. He'd lay it off. England would recycle possession and the move would reset without ever threatening the spaces that actually hurt teams. There were no balls played in behind a high defensive line because nobody was positioned to run onto them. The runs weren't there because the striker wasn't there. In the group stage, England beat Serbia 1-0 through a Bellingham header from a set piece. They drew with Denmark. They beat Slovenia, but barely, a goalless 90 minutes that forced a late, uncomfortable scramble. Against opponents England were expected to beat with room to spare, the attacking unit produced almost nothing from open play. Analysts pointed to the same structural issue every time. No fixed reference point up front, no one holding the defensive line, no threat in behind. When Kane did stay higher, which happened occasionally, a different problem surfaced. The service didn't arrive. England's midfield wasn't set up to find a striker making runs in behind. The patterns of play had been built around Kane, dropping deep to receive. So when he stayed forward, the passes still went into midfield areas where he wasn't. The system had effectively been redesigned around his habit rather than corrected. That detail matters because it means the problem wasn't Kane alone. The team had adapted to something that was limiting them, and nobody had broken the cycle. By the time England reached the knockout rounds, the consensus among people watching the football closely, not the argument, the actual football had settled. Lineker's positioning critique wasn't a personal grievance or a media angle. It described a structural flaw that was costing England genuine attacking threat in a tournament where margins between teams are tiny. The difference between England winning and England going out wasn't talent. They had enough talent. The difference was that the tactical setup around their best players had calcified into something predictable, and the opposition had worked it out before England's own management had addressed it. Kane finished the tournament with 1 goal scored from the penalty spot. For a player of his quality, that number reflects the situation more honestly than any subjective reading of his performances. You don't accumulate those stats by accident. You accumulate them when the system around you stops generating the moments you were built to finish. Lineker had seen it coming during the group stage. By the end of the tournament, there wasn't much left to argue about. England left Euro 2024 without the trophy, beaten by Spain in the final. The post-tournament conversation turned quickly from disappointment to diagnosis. What went wrong and who saw it coming? The answer to the second question was uncomfortable for the people who had spent weeks dismissing Lineker as disloyal. The reckoning came in stages. First, from journalists who had been cautious during the tournament, then from fans who admitted publicly what they'd felt privately since the group stage. The consensus that formed wasn't cruel toward Kane. Most people understood the situation was never entirely his fault. It was honest in a way that the conversations during the tournament hadn't been. Kane had looked isolated. He'd looked heavy. The system built around him had stopped generating chances. The 1 goal he scored came from 12 yards with no defender near him. For a striker of his ability, that output across an entire major tournament told its own story. The individual numbers gave Kane some cover, but only briefly. He'd contributed assists, linked play, won headers. Defenders who faced him in training made him one of the hardest players to mark. All of that was true. None of it changed the central problem Lineker had named in the group stage. Kane's influence on England's shape was compressing the attack rather than opening it up, and the team had never found a way to break that pattern. The broader question that emerged from all of it was one England will have to answer eventually. Kane turned 31 during the tournament. He's still among the best strikers on the planet in terms of finishing and link-up play. But the question isn't whether Kane is good enough. It's whether the system England keeps using around him can evolve fast enough to get the best out of him at this stage of his career. Lineker hinted at this without spelling it out explicitly, and after the tournament, his hints read more like foresight than opinion. What the public argument between the two men actually exposed wasn't just a tactical disagreement. It exposed the cost of expectation. England had arrived at Euro 2024 with a generation of genuinely world-class players, the deepest squad in decades, and the weight of every failed tournament piled up behind them. In that environment, honest assessment feels like betrayal because hope is the thing everyone is holding on to. Lineker punctured the hope not out of bitterness, but because what he was watching didn't match it. Most people didn't want to hear that during the tournament. At the time it ended, most people couldn't dispute it. Neither man walked back his position. Kane remained England's captain and all-time record scorer, still respected, still trusted by his teammates and his manager. Lineker remained one of the most watched and listened to voices in English football. They disagreed, they said so publicly. Neither one pretended otherwise. The argument didn't resolve. It just ran out of new things to argue about, because the football had already answered the question both of them were really asking. Make sure to like and subscribe. And now back to the video. Lineker wasn't trying to bring Kane down. He was describing what the matches kept showing. And he said it clearly enough that it became impossible to unsee once you'd heard it. The tournament ended, the argument faded, and the honest read turned out to be the right one. That's the story nobody wanted to sit with during Euro 2024. Send your thoughts in the comments below, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this one.